growth. Why? Because we are not going to just give fish to these people, we are going to teach them how to catch fish. And they will be standing on their own feet within 3 to 5 years, and that will give strength to this economy. So what are we doing in the long run then? What we are doing over there is, in the long run is we want to have an inclusive and sustainable growth which will carry us into the next 20 to 30 years, and that's when we will become an economy, what it used to be, the 4th largest economy in the 60s. Maybe in the next 10, 15 years, we are not the 4th largest economy, but we certainly will be in one of the top 10 economies in Asia. And once we have that stable economy and stable economic growth, I think you guys in petrochemical who know more about petrochemical can invest. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shaukat Saab. You definitely have had very comprehensive comments about the future and how the policymakers are thinking about it. Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to present a memento to the Honorable Speaker. We're very grateful, sir, that you could make time and be here. For this, may I request Mr. Sajid Aslam of ACCA and also the Chairman BOI, Mr. Asfar Ehsan, to present this memento to the Honorable Federal Minister. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause, please. Thank you, Shaukat Saab, for being our opening keynote speaker. We believe that you have an appointment to get to immediately, but thank you for your presence and your participation. Ladies and gentlemen, as we have the key players of the industry in this room and all relevant stakeholders, I think it would be rather juvenile of me to be going into the details of petrochemicals, but we also have friends from media. So petrochemicals immediately is not just about your supply of energy, oil and gas, alternative resources. It affects every area of our lives, from the carpets that we use to decorate our homes, to the plastic bottles that carry the drinking water that you have, to our cosmetics, to our pharmaceuticals. It affects our lives and our manufacturing and our economic realities in more ways than we can imagine. And another reality is that we are nestled in a region where we are surrounded by petrochemical giants. India, in fact, has an enviable petrochemical industry that currently banks at about $700 million US and is projecting a growth of about 12 to 15%. Like every other player in the market, there is, of course, the risk of having cyclical demand. What it does is, it's of course fed by the volatile feedstock prices, sulky demand, but in the days to come, even if you are hoping to have an industrialization, a next revolution of manufacturing, you cannot ignore your petrochemical numbers. The new numbers that people will be looking at is your per capita consumption of polyesters and polymers. So we're going to get to that shortly, but our next speaker is perhaps the right person to expand upon how potent and how important this particular sector can be. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming His Excellency, the Ambassador of Republic of Korea to Pakistan, the Honorable So Sang Pyo, who will be speaking on the subject in petrochemicals, the catalyst for mega-industrializations and lessons from Korean success.
His Excellency, Federal Minister for Planning, Development and Special Initiative, Asha Omar, His Excellency, Chairman of Board of Investment, Mohammad Ajaf Hassan, and Excellencies and distinguished participants, Assalamu alaikum. Good morning. Yeah. First of all, let me congratulate on the successful organization of this important symposium on Pakistan petrochemical industry. As many of speakers and anchors already told us that the petrochemical industry is a backbone of the old industries. So I'm very happy to honored to share Korea's experience on the Korean's successful industrialization history and experience. And also I'll talk about that a little on the petrochemical industry of Korean cases. I'm not also the petrochemical expert, so I just shared a little on that issue. Korea, as we know that Korea has risen up from that ashes of Korean War, and at the time we only have had the poverty after the war. It was 1960s, and from that time Korea became a world biggest economy. So right now, to make it simple for the history, I divide Korea's economic development history into two periods. The first period is from 1960s to 1990s, and then second period from the 2000 up to now. So the first period, I mean that from the 1960s to 1990s. In that period, our economic development strategy and also policy was government-led development policies. That in those days, Korean government drafted 5 years national economic plan, economic development plan. So with that, we supported all the Korean companies. Interestingly, some of participants knows that when the Korea drafted the first its economic development plan, we benchmarked the Pakistani economic development plan at those days. And so that was the history I was told from many Pakistani scholars and Korean professors. You know, when the Korea started its economic development, surely government needed to provide infrastructure for the companies. At those days, the Korean companies are only infant companies. So at those days, the government role is very important, and also government provided a business-friendly environment with tax exemption and one-stop services to companies, especially for the exporters. So right now, Shokatarin, the finance minister, left. So maybe he is well informed about how what is his role for the promoting the Pakistani companies. So in the first period, as we know that our government policies to help that the Korean companies was very successful and resulted in the rapid economic development. We say that Han River miracle. Han River is passed through the Seoul Korean's capital Seoul, so we call it that history Han River miracle. Very quickly, Korean economy had risen up to the world biggest economy. However, at the end of the 1990s, a huge economic crisis hit the Korean economy. That means that at some period, the government-led economic development policy, it works. But actually, when the economy reached at some point, we need private sector's input to boost that economy. So from the 2000, private sector led Korean economic development. It was possible because that from the 1996 to 2000, already there were many Korean companies enough big to survive by themselves, and they use their resources to make their business profitable. So in those days that we see that much creativity comes from the private sector. So from now, since then, that the Korean companies become more resilient and very worldwide company. So they produce the high-end, value-added, and environment-friendly products. From that time, with first period, we more focused on that manufacturing industry. But second phase is, as we know, that Korean companies, they put more focus on the IT industry and service industry. And we know that famous Korean pop star BTS, so cultural and entertainment industry, that makes a huge profit to the Korean companies. That's the second page is our development. So let me talk about quickly petrochemical industry of Korea. Surely petrochemical industry played a vital role in the process of Korea's economic development. Still, I found that petrochemical industry in Korea accounts for 6%. It's a very huge one. Korean economy is so big, so 6% of Korean economic volume for petrochemical industry is so huge. And I found that also 80% of total export from the manufacturing goods is petrochemical goods. So still petrochemical industry in Korea is so important. And then we know that petrochemical industry, they provide the supplies essential material to other industry. Korea has a huge industry, automobile and electronic industries. All the essential materials comes from petrochemical industry, flow to these automobile and electronic industry. So petrochemical industry is very important in Korea. Also, I guess that in Pakistan, also a very important industry. So we see that several good Pakistani petrochemical companies here. And when I met businessmen from the petrochemical companies of Pakistan, and they talk about that more proactive policy from the government for petrochemical industry. I guess it's important. Given that Pakistani petrochemical industry infrastructure, I guess that there are something to do more from that government side. That's why that chairman of Board of Investment, he willingly organized this kind of symposium. So I guess that this symposium would be the good start to make the Pakistani petrochemical companies industry more resilient, more strong. So I'm very moved to see that many businessmen come together today here. And finally, as ambassador of Republic of Korea, I share a little about the bilateral relation between Korea and Pakistan. And recently, our relation, especially economic relation, have grown up a lot due to the good initiative and very helpful measures and policies from the Pakistani government. So if I mentioned a little, a few, recently Korean construction and energy companies have newly invested 2 more Pakistan hydropower projects in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, which amount to $1.5 billion US. That project will help the Pakistani energy supply. And also, you see that many Korean car, Kia and Hyundai, and right now we had a joint venture between the Korean companies and Pakistani companies, and recently Samsung mobile phone is being produced in Pakistan. And last month, Korean former foreign minister visited here, and she met advisor to Prime Minister for overseas Pakistani. And then at the time, Korean government committed increased the quota of the Pakistani workers in Korea by 50%. The number is not so big in comparison to Saudi Arabia, but still we increased 50% of quota. That makes that a year 1,000 Pakistani workers are allowed to work in Korea. Right now, 1,500. So recently, Korea and Pakistan relation have increased a lot. So in coming years, I only see that more strong, more close relation together. And finally, I hope that this symposium can make a meaningful contribution to the ongoing effort of the Pakistani petrochemical companies and the government to promote petrochemical industry in Pakistan. Thank you. Shukriya.
Thank you, Ambassador. And building on what the Chairman BOI was saying, there is, of course, a lot of room for comprehensive policy frameworks here. Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Federal Minister, Janab Asad Umar Saab, had to leave for an urgent meeting, but he relays to all of you that he will try his best to rejoin us before the closing of today's event. But this symposium is very important for his department as well, for his ministry as well. And the plan really is to put Pakistan on that path for mega-industrialization. Very recently, just as the Chairman BOI alluded, a delegation from OICCI also met with the ministry, with the Prime Minister, and expanded and elaborated that how, even in the short term, this comprehensive policy and an emphasis on petrochemicals can attract an investment up to $3 billion in Pakistan. This in itself is going to improve the investment to GDP ratio of the country by 100 BPS. But if we look at the region, why this is important, and especially for the players of the OICCI, because they're just not looking at Pakistan, but the entire region. Earlier, when I made a comment about India, people say it's an unfair comparison when we compare ourselves to the manufacturing giant of the world. So let us also maybe perhaps take a minute to look at Iran. We know that in 2018, there were sanctions import of them, and their crude oil exports did take a hit. But today, their oil-based products have a much greater export than the crude oil itself. Just looking at the numbers, back in 2019, the petrochem exports of Iran stood at about 20 million. Today, it's about in 2021, it has crossed 27 million US dollars. About the capacity, again, the numbers are enviable. The Iranian petrochemical capacity back in 2020 stood at 90 million, which is up starkly from a 77 million US dollars of 2019. And again, the projection is that this year they will very well cross the 100 million mark. So there's a lot of pulling up the socks that we need to do to stay competitive even in our own region. So ladies and gentlemen, how do we plan for that? And what are the national and the international players thinking? Please join me in welcoming the President of OICCI, Mr. Ghayas Khan, to comment on that.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Special Assistant to the Prime Minister, Khalid Mansoor Saab, Chairman BOI, His Excellency Ambassador of South Korea, Sajid Aslam Saab. Thank you, Sidra. Fellow colleagues of the industry, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. First of all, I'm very thankful to the Corporate Pakistan Group and ACCA, the co-host, for organizing this very, very important event in which we are going to discuss the importance of the formulation of the petrochemical policy and what it can do to our country. It is the formation of the petrochemical policy which is the immediate objective of today. But it serves a very long-term goal of increasing investments in the country both by local and foreign investors, and facilitating foreign investors, enabling foreign investors, and acting as the ambassadors of this great country is one of the core missions of the Overseas Investor Chamber of Commerce. So with that, I'm going to try and answer some very basic questions. Why is this policy important for Pakistan? What can it do for our country vis-a-vis some of the challenges that were very well articulated by the Honorable Minister for Finance? And why now? Why are we having this discussion today and not 10 years ago or 20 years ago? So with that, I'm going to put technology to the test and see if this works. So if you look at economies which are similar to Pakistan, let's say in the range of around 250 to 400 billion odd dollars of GDP, Pakistan along with Bangladesh are perhaps the only two countries which do not have very well-established petrochemical complexes. And we use presence of naphtha cracker as one of the markers of that. And if you see Pakistan is there where a established petrochemical sector or presence of a cracker is not there. If you now go to the right of the slide, that basically shows the consumption of plastics per capita. And if you can very easily see where Pakistan ranks. It's almost half, or let's just say considerably lower than even India, and what to talk of global averages of 55 kilograms per capita where Pakistan stands at 8. And as we've spoken about earlier, and I think Sidra, you mentioned it in one of your comments, that how important this material is to so many industries. And with our economy growing, with our middle class growing, with urbanization happening, with our agriculture sector growing, we can see the increased demand of products like automobiles, cars, bikes, the water that is kept in front of you. In times of crisis, when we talk about syringes, we talk about personal protective equipment, when we talk of food delivery and how it's packaged. Plastics are a very, very integral part of our lives. And it is directly proportional to the progress of a nation and the growth of the GDP. So if you look at the current demand for plastics, it stands at around $4.3 odd billion. But what's important to note, which I will elaborate in a lot more detail later, is that $3 billion of those products are imported. And that import, with the growth of our country, inshallah, and as I mentioned, with the growth of our consumption, the growth of our middle class, will increase to $4.5 billion approximately by 2030. And that is assuming that if Pakistan stays as low a consumer of plastics, much below India and global averages. So this number is only going to grow. If we move on and look at, and if we, just to simplify this, if we were to divide the petrochemical sector into downstream, midstream, and upstream, upstream meaning very complex industrial complexes like crackers, which cost about anywhere between $3 to $5 billion of investments, which need a much more established downstream sector to operate, are still some distance away. We have a fairly established downstream sector, but the real opportunity that lies for Pakistan is in the midstream sector. Because if the necessary investments are made in the midstream, where investment sizes are somewhere around $500 million to $2 billion, then it will lead to the development of the downstream sector, as well as it will give us the opportunity to make those large-scale investments in the upstream. And this story has played out in multiple countries. And I've just stated the example of Vietnam, which followed a very similar path, where midstream investments were made, and now Vietnam is looking to establish its first naphtha cracker. This is a slide which will attempt to answer that why is now the right time. So what you see over there are all the standard petrochemical products, starting with PET, PTA, PVC, PP, methanol, LAB. Just the product which is in front of you right now, the bottle is made out of PET, the cover is made out of PP, and the film that you see which says Nestle is also an application of polypropylene. The construction sector uses PVC for piping, and then of course PTA, which becomes a very important raw material for making PET. So the applications are going to increase, as I said, with increasing demand, and hence the size of demand for each of these products will continue to increase over the next 10 years. And what I want you to pay attention to is the global scale of each of those product categories. What do I mean by this? The market of each of these products now in Pakistan has reached a level that Pakistan can accommodate a world-scale plant. In industrial complexes, it's very important to operate plants at scale because it has a huge impact on the economics, on the variable cost. And hence, the importance of coming up with a petrochemical policy now is more important because each of the product categories have hit global scale demand. And that is why this becomes the need of the hour. I am very thankful to all the people who have contributed to coming up with suggestions on the policy, and the reason for that is that a lot of the companies right now are in the process of developing projects to the tune of almost $4 billion. And the names of the companies are in front of you, and their representatives have been kind enough to be here. This slide basically elaborates on what the Honorable Finance Minister said earlier, that Pakistan clearly needs to increase its savings rate, which will have a direct impact on our investment to GDP ratio, which will lead to growth. I'm not going to spend too much time spending here because he went through the details of that, but encouraging investments is going to be critical for the growth of the country. And when you speak of petrochemicals, there are multiple allied industries that benefit from it, whether it's engineering, project management, energy. We talk of excess energy in the country. It is this wave of industrialization which will solve for the demand, which will partially solve for the supply side issue that we have on power generation right now. The impact on the economy, and again, addressing some of our core challenges, the number one contribution that these roughly $4 billion of investment will make is a contribution of almost $1 billion in import substitution. And I'm talking about net import substitution here. So adjusting for importation of feedstock. Obviously, these setups will contribute in shape of direct taxes. It will lead to an increase of almost 1% in the GDP growth per annum. But last but not the least, it will result in creating jobs, which is, of course, the need of the hour. Formulation of policy leading to investments is not new to Pakistan. We've seen it play out many times, whether it's the fertilizer sector through the fertilizer policy, the petroleum policy, the auto policy, power policy. Now we can obviously stand here and make criticisms of what was wrong in each policy, and that's part of life. We all will, inshallah, learn to improve as we grow as a nation. But one thing is for sure, that all these policies have added tremendous economic value to the country. So presence of policies leads to investor confidence, which leads to investments and growth. And this is something which I'm highly appreciative of the Prime Minister and the team from OICCI, which went and visited him, where he also recognized the importance of coming up with long-term policies to encourage investments. What are some of the basic things that are being demanded when it comes to the petrochemical policy? I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. I'm just going to talk about two things. Number one, some of the benefits on the financing that we are requesting for are very similar to what is given to textiles and exports. And our reasoning is very simple, that $1 saved for Pakistan through manufacturing and import substitution is as valuable as $1 earned through exports. And that is something we need to realize. The second element, which is, I would say, the elephant in the room, which is our request for tariff and duty protection. So I'm going to spend some time on this, because this is very critical, and we need to delve a little deeper into this rather than avoiding it. So allow me to use an example of a project that Engro is developing, which is a polypropylene plant. So allow me to take off my OICCI hat for the next, I would say, 2 minutes. So the polypropylene plant will result in an import substitution of about $350 million every year. And the additional duty which is being requested for will come to around, if all of it is passed down in shape of pricing, will come to around $60 million per year. So one could argue that the inflationary impact of this pass down of duty will be $60 million. But this $60 million will be spread over goods worth around $40 billion. The amount of polypropylene in that water bottle is minuscule. When you speak of a cost of an automobile, the amount of plastic that goes into it is much smaller compared to the overall cost of the vehicle. So this $60 million is going to be spread over a large number of products and will lead to an average increase in price of 0.1%. On the other hand, you are saving $350 million a year. It is a very clear-cut, straightforward choice, particularly for Pakistan. Because the inflation that we need to worry about is the one which comes from systemic devaluation that happens in the country. So imagine that if more import substitution is done, we will address the core issue of our balance of payment, which in a long term will solve for the inflation that we suffer through systemic devaluation. And that is something which the policymakers, I'm hoping, will need to understand, that while this 8%, 11% duty is required, it actually addresses the core and is as important as earning dollars through exports. This is not something, whatever we are demanding in the policy is not something which hasn't happened in developed countries. The Honorable Ambassador from Korea spoke about the whole Korean story. And these kind of concessions and through policy measures were given to the businesses over there also. And a country which started on this journey in 1970s and 80s, 2 years ago exported around $27 billion worth of products. And IMF is also not a worry, because Egypt has gone through a very similar program and their petrochemical sector has gotten similar kinds of concessions. So overall, as we say that for a lot of the things that the country is going through a very important juncture, मुल्क एक बड़े नाजुक वक्त से गुजर रहा है, but this is also a very important moment for us. We can either choose to continue being an import-led economy or invest and make the right moves which will promote industrialization and work towards the longer-term benefit, come up with a solid policy which will not only enable foreign direct investment, and as an OICCI member and president, which is my foremost goal to communicate today, but if Shabir Bhai was to allow me as Vice Chairman of Pakistan Business Council, it also supports the goal of the Make in Pakistan banner of the Pakistan Business Council. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your patience, and I look forward to the rest of the event.
Thank you, Mr. Ghias. And ladies and gentlemen, as we take this conference and this session forward, it cannot be emphasized enough what truly is the potential for petrochemical industries in Pakistan and how it can really tie it up. Ghias very kindly connected the dots in terms of not just immediate gains, but the long-term gains when we talk about import substitution. But it is also no secret that yes, there might be pieces in the policy making which are perhaps missing, and we need to work towards a conducive framework, but other countries have been able to start off things and build their capacity at a much faster rate. From the time of inception to actual commissioning, these petrochemical industries and subsidiary companies take a much shorter time than Pakistan. What seems to be the hurdle? Is it fair to say that it's about our own capacity? Is it the political will? How does the mix come together? Perhaps our next speaker will allude on these mysteries. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the Special Assistant to the Prime Minister on CPEC Affairs, Mr. Khalid Mansoor, for his presentation titled as Large-Scale Petrochemical Investments Require a Conducive Framework.
बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम क़ाला रब्बिश इश्रह ली सदरी व यस्सिर ली अमरी वहलुल उक़दतम मिन लिसानी यफ़क़हू क़ौली। मेरी इंतहाई निगारिश यही है, तेरे नाम से इब्तिदा कर रहा हूँ। BOI Chairman, Mr. Asfar Hassan, Rayaz Khan, President, Angro Corporation, and OICCI President, His Excellency, Ambassador of Korea and Pakistan, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. Well, first of all, my congratulations and compliments to the organization of this symposium, because a couple of days back when Asfar contacted me that I have to come and speak on this symposium, it was very nostalgic. Because way back in my career, if I remember correctly, it was 1998, when I had punched my tickets in Dhar Ki operating fertilizer plants. I was transferred as part of the New Ventures Division. And the first task which was given to me was to do a comprehensive feasibility study on the petrochemical complex in Pakistan. And it was very interesting that at that point in time, the vision of Angro was that we wanted to be a diversified petrochemical company operating internationally. And that was the dream of my mentor, late Shaukat Mirza Zaza Sahab, Allah Ta'ala unki maghfirat kare. And he was so passionate about it that he called me and he said that you have to make it happen. Cut long story short, I was empowered with a budget of about $3 million US. I was allowed to induct a team, and I still remember I put together a team of at least 4 or 5 analysts, very young graduates from LUMS and IBA, couple of technical people, and whatever I brought to the table. And in addition to that, we inducted the world-renowned consultant Chem System from UK. And then the objective was to do a comprehensive feasibility study, and that should be based on the naphtha cracker. We did that study, had all sort of stuff, both technical, commercial, economical, and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, the outcome at that point in time, 1998, if you talk about 1998, it is almost, 24 years, 23 years, it was found to be not economically viable. The reason was that the naphtha which was being produced at that point in time was not adequate, so the entire raw material was based on import. And when the competitive analysis and the vulnerability analysis were done, we figured out that if only 10% of the assumptions which were made to see whether it was technically and economically viable, we found out that it is going to be highly vulnerable. So the chapter was closed, and I know Shaukat Mirza was not very happy with me because the vision has to be changed, and then the Angro's diversification went another way. But anyways, it was very nostalgic for me that at this particular point in time, obviously things are changed. So country has moved on, the demand is there, and also you see the demand of petrochemical complex for such kind of huge investment. Technology was not appropriate, etc., etc. But I guess this is most appropriate time to talk about that, and that's the reason I am here. So based on whatever I could recollect, based on that, detail or deep dive of the feasibility study I have done. So when I was called upon by Ministry of Industry and Production, Khusro Bakhtiar Saab, to come and help them devise this policy, so I immediately offered myself, and we will see that how we can contribute. But now I have put together a very brief presentation, and also would like to share something of my personal experience, that such kind of venture, what they require. Do they require only policy, or do they require conviction? Do they require belief in that one? And I will relate that, but some of my personal experiencing in really, charting in this petrochemical era, and also the slogan which is written over there, part to Mega-Industrialization. And also I will give you some examples, the way the CPEC authority is also trying to move this country in this direction. But before we do that, let me just set the fundamentals, the base case. I think Rayaz has done quite a bit, but I will be very, very brief and then move on to what really needs to be done. It has been said a couple of times, all the way from Asfar to Rayaz, that Pakistan is importing petrochemical products worth 3 billion. And this is not sustainable, and the major driver of this effort is that we have to have the import substitution and have something done, because the products which are being imported, they are growing at a rate of 5 to 7%. And these products are as follows, which is polypropylene, polyethylene, ethylene glycol, paraxylene, synthetic rubber, and styrene. So the major message is that the current import is not going to stay where they are. It is going to be increasing, and it is about the time we see that we should do this import substitution, and if at all possible, maybe export orientation. Now, this is the slide which was shown essentially by Gayaz also, but let me tell you that what is so important to look at the supply and demand situation. And these are the major petrochemical products, including PET, PTA, PVC, polypropylene, methanol, and LAB. As far as PET is concerned, the current production is only 350,000, and that is perhaps the demand even right now. But based on the 5% increase or 5% growth in this demand in the country, it is likely to be 520,000 tons, and that is huge. And that would mean that if this gap is to be bridged, it will require an investment of $120 million US, and the global scale is also 450, so it's going to be really, world-class or, economically viable proposition. Like, PTA also, the gap is even more because this product is growing at a rate of 7%, and it will require an investment of $500 million US to bridge this gap, because the current production is only 500,000 and it has already grown. So the country is importing a little quantity or the gap of about 200,000 tons, and it is likely to grow to 1.2 million tons per annum. PVC, this is something on which I had the opportunity to work very closely. It was set up only as polymerization product in Pakistan, and that was Angro Polymer, and that is where Asad Umar was the first CEO, and I was part of New Venture Division, just trying to help him as much as I could. So the main thing was the building block, that the first product is going to be only polymerization, and then we will see how it could be back integrated. So this product was set up, if I remember correctly, it was about 100,000 tons, and then the time was come where the demand started to pick up, and initial feasibility said the demand is going to be close to 90,000, but when this product was introduced, it was much less. So a lot of marketing effort has to be done. But as the time went by, then there was a need that rather than just importing the VCM, we have to go back to the back integration. And as head of New Venture Division, the task was given to me, and we figured out what should be the most economically viable proposition, and that is something we have done at my time in Angro, to find out second-hand shutdown plant, and from Louisiana we found EDC VCM. It was dismantled, it was relocated, and now the business case improved even further. But now it is already expanded close to about 300,000 ton, but the way it is growing at a rate of 6%, it's going to be 420,000, and that will require almost $400 million of investment. And similarly, I will not go into such kind of detail. I just wanted to create the linkage that these kinds of expansion in Pakistan to ensure that we start producing these petrochemical complex, an investment of about $4 billion will be required. So it is huge, and it is going to be extremely good. If we are able to have the right kind of policy, we have the investor, we should be able to raise the finances. And one of the most important message I have left when I was meeting all these major players who are contemplating to have such kind of expansion or investment in Pakistan, please carry out a detailed, competitive analysis, because you have to compete with the world-leading players who have got so much margin from where these products are being imported. Now, what is the status of the availability of policy? You will see over here that in the entire hydrocarbon chain, some of the policies are already available. Like, for instance, oil and gas exploration and production, the policy is there since 2012. Whether it needs improvement, whether it needs some kind of incentivization, clearly yes, because this will be required to make sure that whatever reserves we still have as the indigenous gas, we must do that, and at an appropriate point in time, some focus will be made over there. The other two sectors are midstream and downstreams, and here you see the policy was there, but in the last few months, a lot of interaction has been done by Ministry of Energy Petroleum Division, and I had the opportunity to participate and engage with the local players. The policy is almost there, and I am very confident in the short period of time it will be enacted and will be put in place. But let me tell you that this was probably for the first time I have seen a lot of interaction of the government with the private sector to find out what they require, why they require, and after a lot of dialogue, the first draft was presented in Cabinet Committee on Energy, and they have asked, a few questions. Those are being addressed, and I'm very sure that this policy will be announced. But why we are here right now and talk about there is no policy for petrochemical. And as I said that the work which was done way back, almost 23 years, and we only have now PVC, and rest of the petrochemicals somehow, they did not have the right kind of attention, and that's why right in the beginning I congratulated that this is the time to really make an effort, and all the players which are really participating in that one, as long as I am part of the government, please be rest assured that whatever support you will be needing, because I think I should be able to relate that what it takes to make these projects technically and economically viable, and this kind of contribution will be there, inshallah. Now, let me summarize, and that is based on the first very comprehensive presentation. All the players were there, and Ghayas also said that they need appropriate tariff protection. And here there is something which is a little reluctance from the government, and fundamentally speaking, we should be having the investment which should be stand on its own feet, rather than having, what degree of tariff protection. But if the country has to start introducing such kind of investment, this kind of tariff protection has to be there, not in perpetuity, but maybe for a small period of time. Plant and machinery import duty exemptions, I think all the incentives where we are inviting or persuading investor out of China and also from rest of the countries as part of the CPEC, I can tell you that based on the competitive and comparative analysis I have done, and we presented that in our recent trip to China, that Pakistan offers one of the most attractive set of fiscal incentives, which includes, very inadequate or very little duty on the plant machinery and import duty at the time of setting up the plant. Income tax holiday for a period of 10 years, and then, low cost local financing, the same kind of financing, because this is going to be a big part, because for any project financing, you have 75% debt and almost 25% equity, or maybe 30-70, or maybe 40-60, whatever. But some portion of this lending has to be done from the local financial institution. And what they are demanding that some kind of incentive should be given, like we have the textile sector, and also the requisite infrastructure. So that's fine, and let me rest this case over here, that it was heard very appropriately by the ministry, and NTC chairperson was also there. I was asked to be a part of that committee, and as the time go back, if you maintain the follow-up, I think we should be able to put this policy in place, and then take it from development all the way to the execution. But whether such kind of initiative is going to be sustainable, I have to narrate a story to you. Power sector, this is the major issue of Pakistan. But what we used to have one of the most inappropriate choice of fuel. Like for instance, 38 to 40% of our power generation used to be based on furnace oil, and that was also the imported one. Unsustainable, and that was causing a huge account deficit, and unsustainable. When we looked at Pakistan versus the rest of the countries, we figured out that almost all the developed and developing countries, their major power generation is based on what? It is based on coal. And here we have been sitting on the 7th largest reserve of coal in Thar, but what was not there? There was no belief, there was no conviction, and at that point in time, again part of the new venture division, I was mandated to do a technical and economic viability study. So we embarked on, and I must say with a lot of pleasure that this is the first public-private partnership which was set up, because such kind of undertaking required a huge investment in infrastructure. That is what you are asking right now for the petrochemical also. And RWE or Germany was engaged, and when we find out that it is one of the most appropriate initiative of Pakistan to have the energy security. So when we were dealing with the bureaucracy at that time, you see, nobody believed that we will be able to make it happen. But what was there? Only one thing, Riyaz. It is conviction, it is confidence. And when I used to narrate that to some other people, that look, what is Thar? Thar has got 175 million tons of coal. 175 billion tons of coal means what? That we can generate 200,000 megawatt for 100 years. And then also it has got potential to get, the gasification, and then when you have the petrochemical complex and the petrochemical complex also. So what was required? That you see, you have to take billions of ton of the mud or the material which is called overburden, and only then you will be able to access the coal which is 195 meters below the earth. So people said that it is not possible, it won't be able to do that. So very interestingly, I have a friend which is excellent poet, and we were together in the college. So once he asked me that, Khalid, please explain me what this Thar is all about. So I told him that, look, Thar, so much coal, it is setting 195 meter, but if we are able to exploit that, we will achieve energy security for the country. So after a few weeks, he wrote, a couple of very small poetry, and it goes like that. कि तने को चीरती कोंपल दिखाई देती है, मुझे बहार की आहट सुनाई देती है, अगरचे मौत का दरिया है मेरे रास्ते में, मेरे जुनून को मंजिल दिखाई देती है. और किसे खबर है कि वो भी कोई बुलंदी हो, because that is where the poet is relating, that you see it is 195 meter. किसे खबर है कि वो भी कोई बुलंदी हो, बुलंदी से जो पस्ती दिखाई देती है, मुझे बहार की आहट सुनाई देती है, मेरे जुनून को मंजिल दिखाई देती है. So gentlemen, you will need this kind of conviction and confidence if you have to move on, because look, what it is shown over here. That excellent success story. The mine was started with, when rest of the world refused that they would not be able to give the financing, it was only the time tested from China, and we had the financing from there. The first phase was almost $1 billion US, and we had 3.8 million tons of mining. And there are 2 330 megawatt projects, which was done by a consortium of Angro. And then they have got, a couple of other local joint venture partners, and also a Chinese company and a bank, Habib Bank, because they said that they have the conviction and confidence to do it only for the national interest. And this is up and running. And I must tell you, this is very high merit order. And now the situation is that you can realize that what is the energy security for the country. As we speak, the landed coal cost because of Ukraine is over $500 per ton. And it is a major dilemma that how we will be able to really support some of the projects which are based on imported coal. But what this, figure or this chart is showing, please pay attention to that Thar coal success is all about the scalability. Scalability means that you have to really increase the capacity of the mine, because it is very easy now. And I will give you an analogy that the first project, which was done close to about $1 billion, and this was 3.8 million tons of coal, but now the second phase is almost done, and the capacity is going to be doubled, which will be providing coal to 2 more 330 megawatt power projects, all as part of the CPAC, and that is going to be completed in next 3 to 6 months. What this scalability does, that it reduces the cost of the coal per ton, and in turn what really happens that it reduces the cost of power generation in the overall energy mix. And that is what country needs, that you have to have the low input cost. And further, when the feasibility study was done, and I was fortunate enough to really lead that feasibility study, some of my ex-colleagues are sitting here, we figured out that, जैसे कहते हैं ना, तेरे सामने आसमां और भी हैं. And I had the opportunity to visit Inner Mongolia. We found out that they have got a huge petrochemical complex. And I'm talking about, this is 2008-9 time period. And what they do, essentially same quality of coal, they gasify it. And once you gasify it, this is called synthesis gas. And if you do that, you will require, let's say, 12 to 15 million tons per annum of coal. This will increase the scalability of mine. And then you have got all sets of products which you can manufacture based on the indigenous raw material. You can have urea. And I am very happy to really report that the last JCC, which was concluded in September after a lot of effort, this is part of an agreed initiative where China is going to be helping us. And in the last couple of weeks, I engaged with a major urea player in the country, Angro, Fatma Fertilizer, and there are one more, local. And also there are two Chinese players. They're extremely interested to have this scalability done. Now, what we found out that you remember that in the last couple of months when there was a shortfall of urea, what kind of crisis it has created. And now there are two things which are highly, highly vulnerable. That we have got about 6 million ton of urea industry, also part of petrochemical, but the indigenous gas is reducing. And the only way you will be able to sustain that industry, you have to have indigenous gas. Either you have to, scale up the E&P activity in the country, or this is where you have got huge potential sitting there. You have to do the synthesis gas or the gasification. And this is part of the CPAC, and it is ratified at the highest level. And when we started to engage with these, major players, what they told me that the country would be needing another world-scale urea plant by around 2030. Otherwise, country will have to start importing. And once we start importing, that is the major pain point the country has. So if we were to achieve that objective, we must start to work now. So that's the commitment, and we have got this kind of, consortium already put together, and all the effort are there. And once you have the synthesis gas, you can have, this kind of fertilizer product and all petrochemical, which you can name it. I have seen it with my own eyes. And since then, the technology has been demonstrated, and we know that we should be able to leverage our relationship, commitment from the China. And let me mention one more thing, that in the last trip of China, when I was assisting Prime Minister, he chaired 20 meetings with global 500 Chinese companies. What they did that, one-on-one meeting, and first of all, they introduced themselves. They said that whatever project they have done in Pakistan, and also pledged their commitment for billions of dollars of investment towards industrialization in Pakistan. And that is what the CPAC Phase 2 is all about. Industry, industry, industry. Pakistan should be a manufacturing hub and meeting three objectives: import substitution, export orientation, and employment. Now, when we went into the engagement with all those players, let me mention that there are two sorts of consortium, rather three. And they have pledged that they can set up petrochemical complex and refineries in Gwadar worth at least 20 to 30 billion US dollars. Easier said than done. So what is our role? We have to now engage. And based on my past experience, now you need to take all those MOUs. MOU is worth piece of paper. But now they need to develop and then get executed. So that is where you see all sorts of commitment has been given to such investors, and those investors are not going to be only in China, but we have alleviated this misconception that CPAC is only centric for China. It is available to all other investors from the rest of the world, and that is the message I have been communicating to various ambassadors. They have been coming to my office, and we are trying to set up another conference sometime next year in which we will fully disseminate what CPAC is all about, what it is offering, what kind of special economic zones we have, what are the fiscal incentives available over there. So with that kind of stuff, at least I have conviction that if we continue with that momentum, and given that there is a full support and assurance from the PM office and Prime Minister himself, he has been very effective in alleviating some of the major concerns of the investor already. And the Special Economic Zone Act, which required that any investor, before he takes his investment into execution, they required 37 approvals, and that is where major wastage of time had been taken place. So all those amendments have been done, and that has been done jointly by CPEC Authority and BOI, and we are very confident that that is going to be there. Now let me conclude that what we really need to do. A couple of points and I will conclude, that we need to formulate an appropriate policy framework for charcoal gasification. And this is the long term. As I said, we need to start now. So the draft policy has been prepared by Ministry of Petroleum or Ministry of Energy Petroleum Division, but we are seeking the private sector feedback, how it is going to be satisfying their requirement. Charcoal chemical industrialization zone may be established with SEZ incentives, because we have already available, there are 9 special economic zones under CPEC, otherwise there are total 22 special economic zones in the country, so we can have a similar stuff, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We need to develop and implement infrastructure project, and one is very important, and again, we are leading it in close cooperation with, with Lucky Power, Engro is there, and this is the project which is going to be replicate of what we have done in Thar, which is public-private partnership, and what it offers, that the phase 3 of Thar is about to happen, because you need more coal to support 2 major projects. One is 660 megawatt project in Port Qasim, and contractually they are obliged to use Thar coal. So they won't be able to transport this coal based on road transportation, so you need a road network. So this project feasibility is almost completed, and Public-Private Partnership Authority has already ratified that, and we will be introducing that inshallah very soon. And I'm very confident that that is going to really not only scale up Thar coal, but also provide such kind of energy or raw material for even cement industry, for them to stop importing almost 14 to 16 million tons. Just 2 points, I'm done. Road shows will need to be done for bilateral agreement with China and other countries. We need to strengthen coordination at all levels of government for timely approvals and policy implementation. This is very important, because once the policy is there, it requires, you see, input from all the relating ministries, and this kind of coordination will be done. And last but not the least, we have to enhance E&P activities, because I believe we still have a lot of indigenous gas. We have, you see, tight gas, we have got, you see, other kind of reserves available, but if the effort with the proper incentives are given, I'm sure that we would still be able to have a lot of indigenous gas. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much for your attention. Pakistan, Zindabad.
Shukriya Khalid Saab, sorry to have rushed you in the conclusion, but we were kind of running behind schedule now. Thank you for understanding that. Ladies and gentlemen, the first segment of our symposium comes to a close. We'll have a much shorter tea break, but before we move outside, may I now request the Honorable Chairman of the Board of Investment, Janab Mohammad Asfar Ehsan Saab, to please step forward, also with our co-host, Mr. Sajid Aslam from ACCA, to present these mementos to our worthy speakers as a token of our appreciation. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the Honorable Ambassador of the Republic of Korea to Pakistan, Honorable So Sang-pyo. Thank you for a very comprehensive presentation about learnings and experience from Korea. Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the President of OICCI, Mr. Ghayas Khan. As OICCI continues to advocate for the industry, finding more avenues to collaborate and grow the economy. Last but definitely not the least, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Special Assistant to the Prime Minister on CPEC Affairs, Mr. Khalid Mansoor. May I request all our worthy speakers to please come forward for a group photograph, please. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll just have a short 10-minute well-being break for a cup of tea or to just stretch and perhaps bounce over some of the ideas you collected here. We have a really powerful technical industry segment lined up for you right after. So please remember to reconvene in about 10 minutes. Thank you.